As we transition to the new normal, we have left others behind. We need to reimagine and redesign our educational system. With the collective effort of schools, sponsors, and TagPros learning management system, and core of passionate teachers, we can deliver free education and champion the cause of our students. Together, we would be able to teach, inspire, and serve, because TagPros believes that education is a right all children deserve. As we transition to the new normal, we have left others behind. We need to reimagine and redesign our educational system. With the collective effort of schools, sponsors, and TagPros learning management system, and core of passionate teachers, we can deliver free education and champion the cause of our students. Together, we would be able to teach, inspire, and serve, because TagPros believes that education is a right all children deserve.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Celine Estaris, grade school teacher and EdTech coach from Xavier School, and I'd like to welcome you all back to our TagPros Children live webinar workshops. This webinar workshop series is brought to you by TagPros Children in partnership with TagPros Education, an up-and-coming online K-12 education marketplace where passion takes the lead in learning. This event is also made possible by the Department of Education, International Cooperation Office, Teacher Education Network, and Next Series. First, of course, we want to share the good news with everybody that we are ready to launch our TagPros Education K-12 marketplace before the month ends. Now, if you were able to watch the videos that we have posted on our Facebook page and that we have been showing earlier as well as in our previous webinar workshops, you would know that those are the steps on how you can be part of our TagPros Teacher Partner program. We've also started to welcome our first cohort of teachers to the platform and met them for an online basic orientation to become our first TagPros teacher partners. Now, of course, we want to encourage everybody to check this opportunity out. And if you're interested, definitely let us know and join us on our TagPros K-12 education marketplace. Now, our TagPros teacher partners, of course, can look forward to certain benefits once they join our marketplace. So, what are those benefits? Well, our teacher partners will be able to earn while they're teaching their expertise at their own pace, place, and time. So, very flexible arrangements. Access to teacher CPD accredited training and professional development. They will get an opportunity to participate in international professional learning opportunities in the United States with our official education partners. They'll also have an official certified TagPros teacher partner badge and many more other perks as you create and conduct, of course, your own online classes. So, to know more about the program, if you're interested, please do spend some time and check out our education marketplace platform at tagpros.us. We are very excited to be opening this opportunity up to all of our educators here in the Philippines and, of course, opening up this opportunity for everybody to be able to earn while you're teaching your passion. If you are interested in joining, please let us know. So you can reach out to us and you can also fill up the form that we have at tagpros.us. Now, before we begin, let's have a quick attendance check and just see where our participants today are coming from. And we'd like to know as well, what grade levels are you handling or teaching? So we can get a bit of a context of our audience today and what kind of grade levels you're handling, teaching, and what students, what ages they belong to. So let's take a look. We have viewers from Kidapawan City. All right. We have from Lawag. Okay. We also have from Pangasinan, from Pampanga. It's so nice to see our fellow educators tuning in from all around the country. And sometimes we do also get a couple of people tuning in from other countries as well. So I do wonder if we have any today. But so far, I'm seeing a lot of people from all over the Philippines. We have as far as even Visayas and Mindanao, not just teachers from Luzon. I see some people who say they're teaching grade 8. All right. So it's so good to see everybody back here with us today. So we have people from Quezon City. Okay. Welcome, of course, to our webinar workshop. Some of you might be, our usual viewers, but we might have also some of our new viewers. So if you're a new viewer, definitely let us know as well. We're so glad to have you here today. And we're so thankful that you're spending your afternoon on this wonderful Saturday to spend time with us and learn with us as well. All right. So as always, please do practice responsible digital citizenship and make we remind you to refrain from sharing any personal information in the comments section. So that would include, of course, your email or your contact number. Please keep your private information safe, and let's also be civil to one another in the comment section. And as a gentle reminder to everybody, registering for our webinar workshop or just watching the webinar workshop does not make you eligible for a digital certificate. So if you would like to receive a digital certificate, you will have to answer the evaluation form, which we release after every session. So at the end of our session today, we will be posting the link for the evaluation form in the comment section, in the chat box, and as well as here on the screen so that you can access it and answer it to be able to claim your digital certificate. Now, after we open the form, you only have a week to answer it because we will be closing it down exactly at Friday at 11:59 p.m. So I think that should give everybody enough time to be able to answer it. For our team replay viewers, of course, we understand that you might not be able to watch us live, but we do hope that you'll be able to watch us on playback and still answer our evaluation form. Now, if you do miss this deadline, unfortunately, we will no longer be able to provide you with your digital certificate because once we close it down, you will no longer be able to access the evaluation form or answer it. So even if you did register and join our session today, unfortunately, the digital certificate cannot be issued. So please do make sure that you complete our evaluation form at the end of our session. Now, we hope that you do understand and remember this quick reminder. Thank you so much, everybody. And so now, let's get to our program. Let's meet our guest resource speaker for today. He is currently an instructor at School of Education and Learning Design and the director at the Ateneo Institute or the Ateneo Institute for the Science and Art of Learning and Teaching. Previously, he has also served as an education technology specialist for the Basic Education Sector Transformation Program through Cardna Inc., where he provided technical support to the DepEd ICT Service Department in the area of technology, evaluation, integration, and ICT literacy. He was also formerly the coordinator of the Next or New Experiences with Technology team at Xavier School. His work experience also includes the design of massive open online courses for professional development and research in the area of education technology and student-centered learning in higher education. He has an MA in Educational Administration from Ateneo de Manila University and is currently taking his doctoral studies in the University of San Francisco. He's also an Apple Distinguished Educator and an Apple Professional Learning Consultant. Let's all welcome to our virtual stage Mr. Galvin Radley Ngo as he shares with us practical ideas, insights, and recommendations in designing different learning modalities within the 3 dimensions. So we have autonomy, applicability, and availability. So welcome, Sir Galvin.
Thank. Hi, there. I'm here.
All right, with the
So,
floor, Sir Galvin.
salamat. Thank you, and thanks to all of the teachers who tuned in today. We know how precious your Saturdays are, so I hope that today's session will be helpful for you, both in the long term as you continue to plan your teaching. I know that there are still more changes ahead for us educators. We thought that we've already gone through a lot of changes over the past 2 years, but yet again, as we rethink in-person learning. But now with some restrictions because of social distancing, among other things, we now have to rethink our models. We now have to rethink what we should do or what is appropriate in our respective classes and schools. And maybe that's why you're here. So hopefully today I can share with you some tips that can help you address some of those challenges that you have, or at the very least help you point to a certain direction in helping you thinking about your challenges. So let me just share my slides. Okay. There you go. So in the presentation today, in this brief session, I've entitled it Designing for Autonomy, Applicability, and Availability. So let me just set something up quickly. So Most of today's session will be drawn from a research that we conducted at the Ateneo Institute last year. And this research was on student-centered online learning in higher education. So we interviewed a couple of students to find out how online learning has been for them. So I'll begin by just situating where I'm drawing some of the ideas from today, so that you also know that in a way, all research are limited by their context, right? So I'd like to begin by sharing with you the context for the research that I am grounding my sharing on, or the insights I will share with you on, so that you also know that in a way, within the constraints of the research, this may be applicable, but maybe in your specific context, you may need to adapt some of the insights or some of the recommendations in your specific milieu. So we conducted this research with 32 higher education students from a private institution. But what I wanted to do today was to share with you not just some of the results, some of the themes that emerged, some of the learnings from our interviews with higher education students, but knowing that the audience today also involves some K to 12 teachers. I think I saw over chat that a lot of you are in fact K to 12 teachers. I added in some data from more research, more recent data collection, where we interviewed 9 other basic education students. No? So apart from the higher education students whose voices you will hear about today, we also interviewed a few basic education students who are currently in the printed modality, a printed module modality, or the digital module modality. So I wanted to start that way, just so you know the contexts by which I will draw some of the stories from. So there were two questions that we were interested to ask the students. This was a time we did this last year, mid last year, as we ended the school year. And after a year of online, distance, remote learning, we thought that it would be important to find out what the students think. No? I know that because we all had to rush to some form of online and remote learning, we really relied on existing research. So we relied on looking at existing research. How do we do online learning? We relied on maybe webinars like this, where other experts, other people with their experience will share their experience, so that we can have some templates to work with. No? So we've looked at theory, we've looked at research a lot, we've looked at instructional design, we've looked at different strategies. And so what we thought of last year is that maybe if we really want to be student-centered in our practice, it would be quite important not to miss out on students, not to miss out on what students think, how students have been, what do they find effective. So we set out to answer, to try to unpack two questions. The first question is, what are effective and or engaging learning experiences of students in a remote online distance learning scenario? So we often talk about the challenges of online distance learning, rightly so, because I'm sure there are many challenges, and there are many challenges that continue to persist in your setting. But it's also important to harvest the positive. No? It's also important to harvest what's worked. So that's the intention of the first question. But more than that, we also wanted to find out what contributes to this effectiveness. So if a student reports to say, this was quite effective for me as a learner, why do they think so? What were the elements that contributed to that? So these were some things that we wanted to understand. And so today, I'd like to invite everyone who's joining us to help me reflect on these things in your specific context. No? That if you pause and maybe think about what your students might think, if you were to ask these questions from them, what do you think might be their answers? No? So if you were to ask them, for example, if you're going to meet them on Monday, no? If you were to ask them, what has worked for you? What has been effective for you over the past year or so? What do you think are specific things that you might hear from them? So maybe I'll just pause for a few seconds just to allow you to think about that. If you were to put yourselves in the shoes of your students, what do you think has been effective for them? Again, we often talk about the challenges, no? And again, we do not discount that there are challenges. But if you try to ask them, if you try to ask them what has been effective, what might be specific things that might come to mind? So I'll pause maybe for a few seconds to give you some space to think about this before we jump into the content of the presentation. If you're willing to share some of your stories over chat, please feel free to do so that we can see the stories from this community. So I'll literally give you some wait time before we proceed. Okay. So I hope that you were able to at least think about this question, thinking about how it's been for your students. And again, the invitation is not just to think about how hard it's been, but to also begin to think about what might we learn if we were to ask them what has worked for them. Because I think that as we reimagine schools, classrooms moving forward, uh, I think that we've gone through a very rich experience, a very different experience as opposed to years prior to the pandemic, that we can learn from a lot. And it will be such a miss if we don't harvest whatever it is that we learned from this experience. So today's session will hopefully encourage you to ask more questions among your students. So allow me to share with you what we found. And again, the intention here is not to prescribe practices, but really to describe what we've found so far, so that hopefully by describing what we've found so far, you can also ask questions to describe your own scenarios and to think about how these dimensions are in your specific practice. So when after doing the research, what we found is that what students reported to be experiences that contributed to effective or engaging learning fell within what we call three dimensions. No, the three A's, as we say, so that we can easily remember the dimensions: autonomy, applicability, and availability. The autonomy of learners as a first dimension, the applicability of content as a second dimension or area, if you'd like to find a synonym for dimension, and the availability of teachers. So in the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you some stories within these dimensions, stories reported by students, so that we can try to hear their voice a little more as we design effective learning moving forward. So let's begin. The first set of stories I'd like to share with you fall under the first dimension. In this first dimension, we talk about autonomy of learners, or the extent by which students are able to learn independently. Um, and I know that this is not very new to a lot of you, or maybe to all of us, right? Because as we shifted to some form of online remote distance learning, most probably some form of asynchronous learning has happened. Some form of self-paced learning has happened for our students. So what did we find in our research, or what did we find out when we asked students about what's effective to them? So within the dimension of learners, or autonomy of learners rather, what we found is that what affects the effectiveness of autonomy of learners are really two broad things. No? The first is that there are decisions that we make as a teacher that directly affect how effective autonomy will be for learners. But at the same time, we also found that there are also decisions that need to be made by students, or that students make, that also contribute to the effectivity of learning. So allow me to share with you a few quotes, a few stories, so that we can take a look at what we mean by this. So let's go to the first factor, or first theme under the decisions made by teachers. One of the things that we found under this factor is that the level of transparency that we create for our course actually affects the effectivity of learning. No? So the first theme here really points to making your materials, for example, available to students as much as you can, so that you can give students more control. No? So for example, here, this higher ed student said, I prefer to have it all available throughout, so that teachers can just put it all there and remove the middleman called emails. So I guess the middleman called emails is what the student was talking about here, is the need to wait for teachers to tell them what to do via email. No? So if teachers are able to just open up, let's say, a course, all of the materials, if all of these are made available for students already, even in the beginning of a course, then they feel like this transparency contributes to them being able to control their learning, or contributes to the effectivity of the autonomy given them in self-paced learning. In the basic ed, here are some quotes that we got from some students. According to this grade 9 modular digital student, less pressure. Pwede kong sagutan kung nasa mood ako versus face-to-face, kailangan na may oras. No? So for our audience who does not speak Filipino, basically this grade 9 modular digital student said that because the materials are provided to them, they can now choose. They have a sense of choice as to to engage, when to engage with the content or not. No? So, for example, if they're not in the mood today, maybe they can delay a bit and then work on the content later on. Of course, we know that this is not always a positive thing, but these are some thoughts from the students. Another thought, though, is here coming from this other grade 9 modular digital student. According to the student, he said, minsan, di ko maintindihan kasi kulang yung pages. No? So I wanted to include this quote just to paint the picture that when we ask students about transparency, what's important or what seems to contribute to effective autonomous learning, learning on their own, is the completeness. Oh, no? So this is the first factor that emerged from our interviews, that as complete as you can give your students, the level of completeness actually contributes to them having more control, them having more confidence to be able to learn autonomously. However, on the flip side, giving everything does not always mean no guidance. No? Does not also mean no guidance, rather. So allow me to share with you a few more stories and quotes from students. According to these two higher ed online learning students. So the first one said, seeing all the modules at once was scary and felt overwhelming. No? So for example, in the school I'm teaching in Ateneo, we use a learning management system, and then we usually have modules. No? So if they see 4, 5, or 6, or maybe close to 10 items there, some students have even personally told me that they just disengage. No? They don't want to touch the modules because they feel overwhelmed. And then building on this, other higher education students said, I wish there was a way for teachers to be able to really estimate better the workload. And it's interesting how some of the basic ed students said something similar. For example, this grade 9 modular student said, ang dami ng activities, quizzes, tests, hindi kasi nakikita ng teacher kung paano namin ginagawa. And this struck me a little bit. So again, for those who are non-Filipino speakers in the room, what this grade 9 modular digital student basically said is that the teachers have assigned so much activities, quizzes, and students without knowing what actually is entailed, without actually seeing the students do all of these things. No? So when I read this struck me a little bit because this really speaks to some of the challenges that our students encounter. I know it's hard to estimate learning time, but then I think we have to begin to listen to some of these quotes from our students. So in terms of level of transparency, it's not just about making materials available, but making sure that guidance is also available. So maybe, for example, if you're on a printed module modality, maybe it's not just about giving them the modules, but maybe also providing a guide, a schedule for them to follow, so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Reassuring them, for example, that this week you just need to do this part, this week you just need to do this part. And again, maybe sometimes we feel like these are things that we can easily assume, but at least based on the students we've interviewed, it seems like these are things that needs to be more explicit to really guide them in their autonomous learning. And finally, in terms of transparency to the course, the students also tempered their liking of transparency by saying that transparency does not mean rigidness. No? Here in this student talked about this higher ed student talked about hard and soft deadlines. No? So according to the student, the professor was very accommodating when it comes to deadlines. There was one time where we didn't understand one lesson, so we was able to push back some of the deadlines, and he made time to discuss that lesson much more thoroughly. So if you look at this quote, this isn't really something new, right? I remember while I was teaching in K to 12, this is a typical practice of teachers, right? We reteach when needed, we adjust to students when we see that they're not getting it, and even in an online or distance or remote setting, students still expect this. No? Students still feel like our flexibility will contribute to their learning. So even if we want them to learn on their own, what this quote is basically reminding us of is that they still need some level of flexibility. No? So even if the modules are set, hopefully we can still have some sense of flexibility, most especially as we learn more about them, most especially as we see how they interact with the content. A second theme under decisions made by teachers is this, that another thing that contributes to effective learning in autonomous learning are really opportunities for choice and creativity. And there are two kinds of choices and creativity that emerge. The first is in terms of interest. So according to this higher ed student, on working on a project where they can choose a topic, the student said, it really made me think about the purpose of the subject and what we're learning. It made me more curious to learn about the subject more. So even if we're in a distance learning scenario, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing this, thinking about using authentic assessments among others as strategies, uh, giving students an opportunity to have a voice and a sense of choice in what they're doing. And for that voice and sense of choice will be as an opportunity to really help them connect what they're learning to real life scenarios. So this is much appreciated, and the autonomy that they feel because of the choice is something that at least the students who interviewed reported to have contributed to the effectiveness and to the engagement that they felt in their courses. In basic ed, this is another interesting quote from a grade 9 modular digital student. Sabi niya, madami rin po akong nagagawa. So this is the main advantage that the student reported to see or to have felt. Only logging on 2 hours a day versus 6 hours face-to-face classes and the need to travel to school. There's more time now to do chores, arts, watch videos, etc., etc. So if you read into this quote, what this is saying is that in a way, the giving some self-paced instruction also favors students like this specific student who would like to explore other things other than academics, right? And who would like to contribute more to the family, as mentioned here, in doing chores or sharing in the responsibility at home. So the opportunities for choice and creativity were manifested in terms of the interest that it allowed to spur among students, and the space and time that was given to them. Finally, another strategy that seems to be aligned to this also are the opportunities for students to work in groups. No? So here are some quotes regarding that. This higher ed student said that when group work was done, they were able to brainstorm and exchange ideas with other students. No? So they were able to check about what they're learning. They were able to help clarify each other's misconceptions. But at the same time, there are also other students who don't really like this. No? So this is an example of a quote related to that. I didn't know who my group mates were. It's weird that you're working with people who you don't know. So if we are to use group work, for example, to create opportunities for choice and creativity, maybe what this tells us is that we need to be conscious that forming the relationships within groups may now need to fall under our plate as well as teachers. No? We may need to explicitly create opportunities for students to build relationships with their group mates. And this may not be something we're used to doing prior to the pandemic, right? Because maybe there are lots of informal opportunities for them to go get to know each other. We simply group them in class and then bahala na sila. No? It's up to them as to how they will get to know each other, what their group dynamics will be. But what quotes like this remind us of is that most especially in a distance learning scenario, we may need to be more explicit with helping our students build these smaller communities to work with. Finally, another sub theme under decisions made by teachers is the appropriateness of the utilized modality. So, for example, for students like for schools like Ateneo, where in our modalities online learning, we allow our teachers to choose whether you will go for a synchronous session or you want to do asynchronous modules, or you want to ask students to do asynchronous modules. So here are some interesting quotes that we got from students regarding this. So this first one is from a student who experienced a course where there were no synchronous sessions at all. According to the student, I found this challenging because when it came to doing the final output, it was entirely up to him, up to me, and I couldn't think of anything. So without guidance at all, the guidance is not as felt without the synchronous sessions. At the same time, this other quote also speaks to synchronous sessions a little bit. It says, on synchronous sessions, it's just that it feels as though I can study this alone. They're just reading off the book, reading off this PowerPoint. To be fair, I can do that alone. It kind of loses the element of going to class. No? So in terms of the modalities that we choose, as we can see here, students do feel if it is appropriate. No? Students do feel the effect of how appropriate it is that you chose this modality for a specific activity. No? So as we saw in the second quote, if the teacher will just literally read off slides and ask students to log on to a video conferencing session, the students will feel detached. No? The students will feel like, oh, this is something that I can just watch on my own if you just have recorded this. No? So I think what this reminds us of is that I know that we speak a lot about purposeful decisions when planning for our activities, but what this confirms is that it has an effect on students. No? The more purposeful we are with choosing the right modality for the right pedagogical approach, maybe the best it also affects the extent by which students will feel like it's effective or engaging. So this is the first sub-theme under autonomy of learners, that within these sub-themes of transparency, choice and creativity, and modality, these are some decisions that we can make as teachers. No, we can design our course to be less or more transparent. We can design choice and creativity into our courses or classes, and we can be more conscious with the type of modality that we're allocating within the learning experience, no, for our students. So this is the first side of the coin, that the decisions made by teachers affect the extent by which the autonomy of learners becomes an effective experience. No? However, there's the second part of the coin. The other side of the coin is basically saying that the decisions made by students also affect the effectivity of autonomous learning. So what are some things that we learned from this? The first one, and this could be obvious because I've heard this a lot in conversations with teachers over the past few years, is about the conduciveness of the learning environment. So allow me to read a few quotes again. So in this first quote from this higher ed student, what this student said, what I find hard is when we have synchronous sessions and then, because I share the room with my sister, and then she also has a meeting or class. Now, so for other students, they also have siblings taking online classes, and during synchronous sessions, they hear each other. No? It's very distracting. Or for example, I have a 4-year-old son, and occasionally he would enter into my personal space here, even during class. So things that you have no control of at home, no? That becomes challenging because of where you are at, no? Because you're not in a school setting. The second quote says, "I think it also helps when you do your own workspace in just one place, only because you know, like your body knows, okay, it's work time." So for some students, they said what's helped them is to find a regular place in their homes, such that when they go to that place, they know that it's study time. So a very interesting tip from one of the students we interviewed. In basic ed, here's one of the things that a grade 9 online distance learning student said. Yung isang may malakas na signal, naintindihan niya yung lesson. Yung isa hindi. Choppy yung teacher, hindi niya maintindihan. No? Or in English, this really describes the situation wherein there are some students who have intermittent connectivity, and when they log on to a video call, it's inconsistent. No? So when they're listening to a lecture, for example, it's very hard because the teacher is often described as choppy, or the connection is choppy. So these two quotes speak about how finding the right learning environment or conducive learning environment also contributes to the effectivity of autonomous learning, of learning without the physical presence of the teacher. And maybe as we try to imagine in-person learning, this might be some things that we can actually resolve by having some students on campus, right? I remember that in other countries, I've read that when more in-campus experiences were allowed by the government, the first few people that they allowed on campus are students who have intermittent connectivity, to be able to allow the students to use the facilities on campus to still participate in their online classes. So here's another theme related to this, that the decisions made by students are also decisions in terms of time, that how they choose to manage their time very much affects how effective their learning experiences are as well. So here are two quotes that try to illustrate that. The first is from a higher ed student. I just try to follow a schedule that I set for myself and just not break that pattern. So for students who've been able to come up with a pattern, who've been able to come up with a schedule, a routine for themselves, it was very helpful for them. No? And then there's a very interesting quote here from a grade 2 student. Sabi niya, sumagot-sagot ako ng mag-isa ng module pag nagigising ng maaga at tulog pa ang magulang. No? So this grade 2 student, when the grade 2 student was sharing this with us, she was very proud to say that she was able to actually finish the modules on her own. No? So there are lots of things to read between the lines in this statement. The first is She was very happy to be able to find a quiet time in the morning when everyone was still sleeping, to be able to work on the modules. But another telling thing from this quote is that you can also read between the lines and say that, and read that maybe the parents are hovering on her too much, no? Or trying to, or is underestimating the actual student's capacity to go through the modules on their own, no? Such that the student had to find time to try to do it on their own while the parents are sleeping, or without the parents' intervention. So when students are able to choose to manage their time or to find time, this contributes to the effectivity of autonomous learning. This last sub-theme, is about initiating independent research. This is another thing that students said that they decided on that helped them in their learning. The first comes from a higher ed student. He said, I had to go to YouTube and do extra research just to get an intuitive understanding of the subject. So looking at other resources, and very similar quotes, and there are lots of this in our interviews, very similar quotes from grade school students as well. This is from a grade 7 modular learning student. Kung hindi maintindihan, search na lang sa Google. So if you don't understand it, just use Google and look it up. So students are able to manage, no? Because they're able to do these independent activities even if teachers did not explicitly tell them to do it. Of course, we might see this from different perspectives. One perspective might be to see it as a deficit of our modules. That could be one perspective. But another perspective is also to see the value of students being able to do this. What if our students are really equipped to be resourceful? Then we need not wait for the perfectly designed module for them to actually learn effectively, right? If we're able to promote such practices, then students will be able to learn despite some of our limitations. So 3 things that students can decide on: their learning environment, the time, and the initiative to do independent research. So in this first dimension of autonomy, we see how the decisions that we make as teachers and the decisions that are made by students or learners affect how effective and engaging their experiences are, no? Most especially in self-paced learning. So maybe as teachers and designers, this might be a design question you can think about. What are structures, strategies, and practices that allow your learners to effectively engage in independent learning? What are some decisions that you made as a teacher that you feel contributed to their effective autonomous learning? What are some decisions that you feel you can help students make, right? Because maybe some of the things they're really are skills that you need to train them for. So for example, maybe time management, managing tasks, prioritizing. Maybe these are explicit skills that the shift to autonomous learning has surfaced as quite important. No? To what extent do our schools really prepare our students for these? And even if we're reimagining schools to have some sense of in-person learning already, these things are still important because, as you can see, a lot of the models that we're considering right now in our schools are somewhat blended or hybrid models that still assume the autonomy of learners. So if we were to design within these dimensions, what are some specific things that we can tweak, specific things that we can do, specific things that we can avoid doing? So I hope that you can begin to think about this, and maybe you can begin to take notes or take note of some specific things, adjustments that you feel these insights are inviting you to think about in your specific setting. So let's go to the second dimension. The second dimension is what we call the dimension of applicability, or the applicability of content. Here, what we mean is that this is the extent by which your course content was perceived by learners to be applicable to their students' context. And we try to describe applicability in 2 ways based on the data that we gathered. The first is that applicability is also synonymous to relevance. And I'll speak to this in a short while. But another way of interpreting applicability is to look at utility, or at least the perceived utility of students. So what do you mean by this? Again, a few stories to share with you. So here are some quotes related to the theme of relevance. No? So relevance, at least in the interviews that we gathered, relevance according to the students uh, help them learn if they felt like it was relevant first to their personal context. Now, so here are some things that they shared. This higher ed student said the personal interest in the subject matter or pop culture usually helps. No? So, for example, if you're so into math, maybe, then math will always feel relevant to you. But then some teachers try to use popular culture. No? So, for example, a K-pop craze and trying to make connections between things that they're exposed to in pop culture to the content of their course. No? So, according to students, this helped very much. Here's another quote. I really did not like it because I'm not a stat person. I don't do data and stuff like that as much. No? So this other quote shows the opposite side of it, that relevance sometimes isn't something you can easily assume. And maybe there are some things that are harder to make relevant for specific students. No? For example, right now I'm teaching an Educ 101 class, Foundations of Education class, where we talk about the history and philosophy of education. I'm pretty used to teaching students in our minor track or our master's track, basically those who want to be teachers in the future. But in this particular course I'm teaching right now, it's an interdisciplinary course. So I have students from management, from the sciences, who just want to learn about the content. So I think if we use this theme in this particular context, what this theme is telling us is that I have to be aware that maybe some of them are management students and may not want to be a teacher in the future. So how can I make my content relevant even to those students? So I think that this is challenging. This has been a challenge for a lot of us because as we shifted to the pandemic, we wanted to come up with solutions for everyone, right? The same module to be used by everyone. But then what this reminds us of is that connecting that generic module for everyone to the personal context of students is still important. Other students also reported that they valued and they found effective when teachers did not just connect to personal context, but to the societal context as well. So, for example, here in this quote, the student was talking about his social science teacher. So he said he really changed a lot of the topics to reflect the pandemic. We would still discuss poverty, I'm guessing is part of the original syllabus, but it was towards the pandemic context. He expounded this by saying, talking about people who have lost their jobs, among other things, in the current context. So this is another connection that you can make so that students will feel the relevance of your content. Make a connection to the societal context. I guess most especially for older learners who are more exposed to social issues and social realities. So, two ways by which we can establish relevance, at least according to our research, connect to personal context and connect to the societal context. The other side of the coin, in terms of applicability, is what we call utility. Utility, or at least the extent by which students feel like it's useful. No, what I'm learning is useful. And what we found is that there are two things that contribute to this. The first one is what we call opportunities for practice. No? So allow me to read this quote from an English literature course. From the student said, our assessments focused more on synthesizing what we learned into our own research. So we just had to watch TV shows or just watch a movie. And then after that, we have to apply the things we've learned into the things that we watch. So we got a lot of quotes similar to this, students talking about mostly authentic assessments, where what is being assessed or the task being done does not just assess their understanding of content, but really gave them an opportunity to bring their content to authentic scenarios or make connections between the content and authentic scenarios. Here's another simpler example from a grade 2 modular student. Nagustuhan ko yung practice sa pagsusulat ng letter. No? That the student just reported that the student appreciated those things that they needed to do in the module, no? That they're not just reading, they're not just looking at materials, but there were opportunities for practice, opportunities to actually do things. No? And I think this is something we may want to think about, no? That in asynchronous learning, in what we ask students to do, are the activities more passive, or are we also able to design activities that are more active or that involve them actively? Despite our presence, no? Because it is possible, as we can see here from this grade 2 modular student. Another way by which utility was felt by students was when teachers made a clear connection to the future, most especially for higher ed students. For example, the students said that they remembered a lot from classes that use Microsoft Excel because they found this to be a useful skill to have in the future. So as a college student learning about Excel, it was quite clear for them, most especially this management student, that this will be a tool that they will use in the future. So if you're able to make that clear connection to the future, students could feel that the content is more useful, or they would feel like this is something that I really want to learn because this is useful for me. So, what's the design question when we take a look at the dimension of applicability of content? Maybe we can phrase it this way: how can I explicitly make content feel applicable to my students? And I explicitly say here feel applicable because I think the slant of this research is to also care for how students perceive, not just what we think. Because sometimes we design things based on our own thinking and our own assumptions, but then it doesn't cut across. No? So, for example, you're so interested, in pop art, and then you use that as part of your subject matter, but then none of your students are interested in that. So, even if you made an attempt to make your content relevant, you weren't able to make it relevant to them or applicable to them. So, it's important to really put yourselves in the shoes of students, and I think this is the reminder of the second dimension. How might we make our course content, our classes content more relevant or feel more useful to our students, most especially in scenarios wherein we're not around, we're not physically with them. The final dimension is what we call the dimension of availability of teachers. This is pretty straightforward. This is the extent by which students felt that their instructors were present, that their teachers were present. And what we found from this research is that there were three specific things that often contributed to this feeling of availability. So the first is responsive communication, the second is the type of feedback, and the third is rapport building. So allow me to again share a few stories from the students we interviewed. This first quote is from a higher ed student. What the student said is, what I prefer is that they'd open channels. I would appreciate if they'd be online there and be responsive because it really helps us to know that if we don't understand something, we can just message them and set consultations with them. So being able to open up communication lines, I think more than ever is quite important. In fact, this student even said that maybe the apart from the learning management system, the teacher can have like a messenger group, which they can where they can interact with the students more promptly. But again, of course, the extreme of this is that teachers doing so much overtime just to answer every student. I don't think this is really what the student meant then. But having or establishing communication lines and being responsive, committing to what you've established seems to be valued and seems to contribute to effective learning of students. On the other hand, no, we have to also be conscious that maybe for some students who we haven't really met in person, they might feel like this. This is from a grade 9 modular student. Sabi niya, nahiya ako magtanong sa teacher during video calls. No? So even if we open channels, sometimes students don't reach out to you on those channels. And maybe this could be a reason because the students don't know you personally or don't feel comfortable to reach out to you. And so this may be something we may need to establish, most especially in the beginning of a class, a term, or a course. How can we create that rapport, which we will speak to again in the next few slides? How can we create that rapport with students so that they will really feel comfortable reaching out to us? A second theme that contributes to availability in this research is what we call the type of feedback. There's this very pointed quote from one of the higher ed students. He said, "We don't see feedback, we just see grades." So at the end of it, we're like in the dark, like, oh, maybe this works, maybe this works, maybe this doesn't work. So sometimes we think that grades are enough feedback, but as we can see here, students are hungry for more than grades. No? Students are hungry to really see if they're getting it. Students are hungry for better types of feedback from us teachers. And the grade 2 modular students also confirm this assumption, no, the value of feedback. According to this grade 2 student, they really valued kapag binabalik yung module na may check. No? So apparently, maybe for some students, their experience has been modules are collected, but then they don't see the modules returned to them, or maybe not enough feedback is provided when the modules are returned to them. No? So they aren't able to see where they are. They aren't able to check if they are getting it or not, and this makes them feel this contributes to the lack of availability felt of teachers, and of course, consequently, to the effectiveness of their learning experiences. Now, in this final theme, this is regarding rapport building. So according to students, they still appreciated when teachers were not just all academics. No? So allow me to read this quote. What made it fun was the professor himself made sure that the class was not completely hard learning. He wanted us to talk to him, not only as teacher and student, but more like friend to friend. Of course, ideally within professional means. He's trying to build a relationship with us, not merely in a classroom setting. And I think that a quote like this can easily be heard even prior to the pandemic, right? Students appreciating teachers who got to know them, who formed relationships with them, just beyond that transactional relationship that is a default between teachers and students in the academic setting. So building a rapport was quite important. But the rapport building was also valued not just between teachers and students, but also among students. No? And this quote is about an absence of that. No? So, according to this grade 9 modular students, when we asked this person what they missed most or what they feel they missed out the most from school, they said that seeing classmates in person, na hindi lang chat-chat sa GC. No? So, being able to build rapport not just with teachers but with the learning community is also an important part of the learning experience, at least as reported by these students. So in this last dimension of availability, we take a look at how things like responsive communication, timely feedback, and rapport building as strategies, as activities, contribute to the students feeling the instructor's presence. No? So, what is the design question that you may use to make this happen a little more in your courses and classes? What are routines that can be in place to ensure that students feel my availability or your availability? What are specific touch points that you can plan out such that students will feel that you're available to them, you're there to guide them, and you're there not just as a teacher but as a guide who is there to build relationships with them and with the learning community. So today, this afternoon, I present to you these three dimensions as a thinking tool that hopefully when you plan for your teaching, as you reflect on what you might want to do on Monday or in the far future, hopefully you consider thinking about how you can contribute to effective learning in these three dimensions. No? The dimension of autonomy, the dimension of applicability, and the dimension of availability. I'd like to end with this. I encountered this a few years back. This is in the Zulu tribe. Their greeting. This is a greeting that they use, and the greeting is sawubona. So they say sawubona to each other. So siguro sa atin yung counterpart pwedeng mabuhay or parang hindi ko alam ngayon hello, di ba? But for them, when they see each other, they say sawubona, and sawubona for them means I see you. I see you. So I think that if we think about what we really mean, or maybe the insights that we got from the research, what they all mean, I think what they have reminded us of is this, no? That when we encounter our students, whether it be online, remote, modular distance, modular digital, whatever encounter we have with them, hopefully we can be conscious of making them feel this, no? Making them feel sawawanan, making them feel like we see them, uh, and to what extent and the extent by which we're able to hear their voices and to allow their voices to also be part of our design. We do a lot of professional development, I know, and I think that's great. But maybe another thing that we can include in our professional development are really questions that we can ask students. That's professional development, I think, in itself. To be able to ask students how they are, what's working, what's not working, to be able to try to adjust things and see how it is for them. I think because there's still many changes ahead, if we work closely with our students, I think we'll be okay. So thank you very much. I hope that that presentation has helped you reflect on your own context today, and as you plan for the future context in this next normal or next possible.
Thank you so much, Sir Galvin, for sharing your expertise with us. So let's all, of course, give Sir Galvin a virtual round of applause. So thank you so much.
Salamat.
There's so much that we learned there, Sir Galvin. Definitely a lot of things for us to think about as educators in terms of autonomy, availability, and applicability. So these are some things that maybe we've overlooked from the way we design our lessons or the way that we teach. But it's so glad to have that reminder as well to think about these things. So we'll be moving on now to our open forum, and of course, Sir Galvin will be responding to the questions that you've sent us during the session. Now, if you still have a question, feel free to just send it in the comment section or in the chat box, and we'll definitely try our best to get to them within the time that we have. But we do also have, of course, a couple of insights as well from our viewers. So I have here from Tonette Parent. She says, Sir, dahil din po sa online, the parents were able to learn also. So even because of online learning, even parents have also learned, I guess, because they're listening in on their kids' lessons. I
Right.
actually want, yeah, I relate to that as well, actually, because even when I have my PTCs with parents, they say that, oh, we sometimes listen in on our kids' lessons, and ang dami ko natutunan na hindi ko alam before, which is interesting to me. We also have here from Jeffrey Beltran. He mentions feedback. There are types and levels even in online learning, which I think
Right.
is yeah, something to remember as well. Okay, so we have actually a few questions as well from Tonette. We're going back to Tonette Parent. She's asking, among the three, which one is more effective or need talaga ang three to merge
To
as one?
merge.
Yeah. So is there one that's more important than the other, or do
Right.
we really need to have them all at once?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at least as far as the way we've articulated the dimensions from the research that we conducted, I think the intention was not to have like not to say that every learning scenario should have all the three A's, no, but rather I think the intention is to use the three A's as lenses to make your decision. So, for example, if you're doing some form of asynchronous learning, you may want to consider some of the factors under autonomy. If I think if I were to choose, if you were to choose only one though, to be honest, I think that the minimum is applicability. The minimum consideration is applicability because I think focusing on applicability really goes a long way. So, for example, if you're in a printed module modality, if you really focus on writing your modules and making sure, let's say, looking at the language that you use, that it's approachable to students, looking at the examples that are included there to make sure that students can relate to it. I think that if you're talking about minimum viable product and if you could drop all of the other things, I think the second A for me would be most important, applicability. That I think content that's applicable, if given to students, will have a greater chance, will result to a greater chance of learning, even despite the absence of the other things that I mentioned today. Well, that's a guess. You can test it out, ma'am. But that's my opinion. No? Start with that because I think that at the end of the day, it's what students are facing every day. Parang they're looking at your module, di ba? And that's the primary contact. That's the first contact point. So I think if we were to resolve something first, maybe we look at that first.
All right, thank you so much, Sir Galvin. So I guess it also depends really on the situation that you're in and what you're trying to
Yeah.
achieve with your students. Yeah, so thank you so much. Definitely, all three of them are important. We understand that, but yeah, maybe there are different ways that we can apply them. We have some more insights here. So Jeffrey Beltran is also saying these three components, if properly integrated, will make online learning effective and meaningful. And I definitely agree with that. And I think all of our other educators agree with that because especially right now with online learning, as you've mentioned, it may impact our students in a different way because they're learning in a scenario where they're distanced from their teachers and they don't get to interact with their classmates. So it feels kind of isolating. Um,
Right.
right. I also am enrolled in like an online learning course, so I do feel that way sometimes. That it's isolating because it feels like I'm the only one learning. I know my classmates are there, but we don't really interact. So it's nice to look at these three approaches and know that there are ways that we can definitely make it easier also for our students. Christine Bordeo says, "Thank you for sharing your expertise. I learned a lot." Okay, I think we
Yeah.
all learned a lot. We do have a couple more questions. One
Go
question
ahead.
is, um, when we're talking about autonomy, so for older
Mhm.
students, for our higher education students and our high school students, it's easier for them because they do have that independence already to
Mhm.
learn on their own. But what about for maybe younger students, like our students
Mhm.
in primary school or in grade school?
Mhm.
How can we encourage them to also have that autonomy in learning?
That's a great question. I'll share something quite personal. So I have a 4-year-old son, as I mentioned earlier. He's now in preschool, no? And I guess in a way we've been having a first-hand experience of the parent side of things. But I'd like to share one of the insights that my wife and I talk about when we observe. My wife and I are both teachers, so we sort of nerd out about these things. So uh, one of the things that we observed is that when the tasks given to him are things that he likes, number one, and number two, when he's able to when the language used, for example, is something that he understands, or the medium used is something that he can access. Um, it, it 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 does pave the way for some level of autonomy, and at least interest in doing the task on its own. So for example, I'll give a clear example. There a lot of learning platforms right now allow for teachers and students to interact with each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the features that we found quite helpful is when teachers can do voice messages, most especially for younger learners, right? So, for example, if giving instructions, of course, tayong teachers, diba, we create lesson plans, we write it down, and all
Mm-hmm.
of those things. But if a teacher, for example, would give the instructions via voice, then you're lowering the barrier for a non-reader to be able to know the instructions. And you're also lessening the dependence on the parent, right? Because this non-reader can understand, for example, basic English, simple English,
Mm-hmm.
even if they cannot read the English. So maybe thinking about those things. In lower years, I think one of the primary considerations is language, right? What medium are they comfortable already to communicate with? Verbal, are they readers, non-readers? And to try to work within what they bring, no? To work,
Mm-hmm.
look at their starting point or what students are able to do at that moment in time. So maybe that's one way of encouraging autonomy. Of course, again, we cannot generalize, right? Because I think that obviously speaking, as we grow older, we become more comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
autonomy, and I think that's just a natural thing. Um, Obviously, also younger learners need more guidance. That's why parent involvement for younger learners has increased, as we can see all over the world, most especially for lower years. So those things might not. I mean, we cannot easily assume that
Mm-hmm.
autonomy can happen effectively for all students. But I think a level of autonomy, or having a level of autonomy across all year levels, is important. And I think that grade two quote was one of the things that struck me. That if you give the space and allow the students to try, and they succeed, they will want to continue trying. But if we don't give them that space to even try, we just take over. And this could be really a temptation, most especially as you go to in-person learning. Diba? Parang, okay, we're back in the classroom, we're going to control everything again. Diba? So I hope we try to resist that temptation, because I think that's one of the things that we've seen over the pandemic, how important being able to learn autonomously is,
Mm-hmm.
not just for young students, but for older students, or even professionals like us that need to continue to learn in our professions. Hope
Definitely. Thank you,
that helps.
Sir. Yeah. So I do like that idea that as young as they are, we need to teach them that. And I think for us as educators, sometimes we do have that tendency to coddle our students, especially the younger ones, because we feel like di pa nila kaya yan, they can't do this yet. So we have to really guide them. And while guidance is important, like you said, it's important to give them that space to try and learn on their own as well, because it's how they learn to also manage things on their own. So that's a reminder for all of us to, of course, give our students some space from time to time. All right, now so that's for autonomy. Let's go to applicability. So for applicability, if we have a group of students who are all coming from different backgrounds, they have different, they come from
Mm,
different situations.
mhm,
How can we make things relevant for them or applicable for them? How can we make our lessons or the things we're trying to teach them relevant for them if they're all coming from these different perspectives?
So let me give an example from one of the teachers I observed
Mm-hmm.
in higher ed, but I think the example also is relatable even in basic education. So I worked with this philosophy teacher. So we had a mentoring program. I worked with him. I think this was 3 or 4 years ago. And then one of the things he shared with me is that whenever he introduces content, one of the things he spends a lot of time in is preparing examples for the content that they're presenting. And we do that a lot as teachers, I'm sure. Di ba? Parang you want to introduce this concept, ano kayong mga example? What are examples that comes to mind? But what he realized in the process is that the examples that he can come up with are limited by his own experience and perspectives. And
Mm-hmm.
that will always be our limiting factor. We will always be different people from our students. So what he tried to do was to still offer some examples, but to create space in his classroom to ask students to generate their own examples. So I think in the area of applicability, I think that's the wisdom that we got from the students who talked about choice and creativity. If you have activities that offer some level of choice, even if it's as simple as choose a topic, diba? Even if it's as simple as choose a topic or choose between these topics,
Mm-hmm.
um, then you immediately give the ball to them in a way. You immediately pass the ball to them, so to speak, and they would feel that involvement. No? So I don't think we can ever analyze what's relevant to all of the students we will meet in our classroom. I don't think that's realistic, but we can create spaces for these examples to emerge, for their own examples to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
So hope that helps.
Yes, so giving our students, I guess, that platform to share their own experiences as well. And yeah, I think that would be helpful in helping the students understand each other's perspectives as well, which is great because they're learning from each other's experiences and not just from this one example for
Right, right,
everybody. Like we
right.
say, right, that there's no such thing as a one size fits all. So I guess in this context, it's the same thing. No one example will be helpful for all students to really understand what we're talking about. And I think it's important that they learn how to um, uh, kind of connect those dots on their own as well, and then
Mhm.
connect it to their own lives. So definitely great way of thinking about that as well is to consider the perspectives of our students coming from their own experiences and not just from our own examples as well. And then for availability this time, how can we be open to our students, having that avenue for communication while still setting, a limit so as not to,
Mhm.
since we're teachers, we spend a lot
Right.
of time working, but how can we avoid it that they're kind of encroaching already on that part of our time where it's supposed to be for ourselves already?
Thanks for bringing that up, Celine. I think
Mhm.
this is a very prominent problem that we heard a lot in 2020, most especially towards the end of
Mhm.
2020. A lot of teachers getting burnt out um, because of their passion, or because of their passion for and compassion towards their students. What's there's I don't think there's a one specific answer to this, but I'd like to share something that I've tried doing. I've seen a lot of teachers doing
Mhm.
also. I think what helps is setting up those boundaries from the beginning
Mhm.
and committing to them. No? So, for example, not to say that my classroom is the best. No, one of the things that I tried is that in the beginning of every course, I tell my students that if you want to reach me anytime between Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can expect that at most within the day, I will respond to you. Uh, and so far I've been able to commit to that. But while communicating that to them, I also told them that I try to keep my Saturdays for myself and Sundays for myself. So I tell them from the beginning that if you are to email, message me on a Saturday or on a Sunday, do expect that my replies will be delayed. That at the soonest reply would probably be on Monday. So I think that if you set up those boundaries from the beginning and you stick to it, I think it's important to stick
Mhm.
to it. Of course, we're not talking about emergency cases here where you will use that as an exception. But if you set up those boundaries, you're not really setting limitations there. I'd like to think that you're setting opportunities, that those boundaries are the way you communicate those boundaries is basically to say that you can reach out to me here, and if you reach out to
Mhm.
me here, I will be there. I will be there. So the I will be there is also as important, because when students try and they don't feel like you're meeting those commitments, then they
Mhm.
will stop believing you, right? And they will stop believing in the boundaries that you set. So I guess those two things, no? Set boundaries, and set boundaries that you can commit to. Diba? But be kind
Mhm.
to yourself as well. Don't say na 24/7 you can reach me any point, anytime. Of course, you'll get burned out. That's the reality. And I'm sure that you want to continue to do this work that you want to do.
Mhm.
Uh, then you don't want yourself getting burnt out. So you take care of yourselves also. So thanks for bringing that up, Celine.
Okay. All right. So I think we have one more. So we're looking at a lot of these, the three A's, right? Mostly through the perspective of like our online students or online learning and modular students. Now, how can we apply these three A's for students who maybe, are not able to connect with us through online? Let's say those who have trouble with connectivity, those who have no access to it all. How can how can we be there? How can we be available for them? And how can we help them with autonomy when
Right.
they're not able to also, connect with us through those avenues or through those methods?
Thanks. That's a great question to also consider the variety of our context, most
Mm-hmm.
especially in the Philippines. I'll be quite honest. The first two A's, I think there are ways of going about it. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, when you talk about what I shared on autonomy, I
Mm-hmm.
think one clear way that we know, and this is not just coming from the research, but also in research and theory and instructional design, one clear thing that we know is that uh, if you design something with good structure, if you put a lot of work in the structure of the learning environment, and when I say learning environment, it could be like a piece of paper that they're reading, right? If you look at how you write those things, if you look at how ideas are presented there, if you really pay attention to how you design those modules, then you can build in some elements that will allow learners to be successful in autonomous learning. For example, instead of maybe just dumping a couple of modules to them, can you design a guide? Can you design a guide to help them understand which modules will they do first? Uh, how are the modules related to each other, and things like that. So you may not be there while they're doing the modules, but I think there are ways to anticipate some of the things that they might encounter while they're going through the modules on their own. So I guess in terms of autonomy, that could be one way of going about it. In terms of applicability, I think I mentioned earlier that looking at the content and how you present content is a very simple way of addressing applicability. Um, Maybe, for example, if you're designing a printed module, um, being conscious of the examples that you use can be one. But as we talked about earlier, also creating those open spaces, no, even in a printed module. In the research I read, I think it was in the book of Horton, what he said was even rhetorical questions in their studies actually contribute to learning. So even literally, if you just have a question in between paragraphs, that already contributes to learning versus someone reading one paragraph at another without any pause. So even inserting those pauses will already insert some sort of teaching presence. No? It may not be the kind of teaching presence you're used to, but what we know from instructional design research is that those things contribute, those things help. Now, the last A is something a little tricky, the availability of the teacher, because I think that, to be honest, um, you will really still need some form of communication tool to be able to reach your students. No? And I don't know how else we can do it if it's purely, let's say, on printed format. And I think we've also seen this. We've also seen this. I know of a lot of friends who teach in depth ed, for example. Um, they have printed modules. A lot of my students also in MA classes teach in depth ed. So they have printed modules, but then they have a GC, a group chat, where they're able to chat with students. No? So being able to have that communication line is, I think, quite important. Um, and maybe in that particular scenario, if you were to weigh how you will use that group chat, I'd say use it more for the last aid. Use it more for that approachability more than the other A's, because we also know that despite these limited channels, the level by which students can participate is also limited by their load, limited by their
Yeah.
time. So you want to make the most out of that, no? And I think that this could also be a thinking that we can actually use when we go back in person. When
Mm.
we go back in person, which A will you want to do more? No?
Mhm.
I think my general bias is maybe the third A is most
Mhm.
important because that's the A that students all cannot really do on their own. But that's my opinion. There may be some things in your context that will get in the way of that, but use it with a grain of salt.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Galvin. That's such a great answer. I like how you were able to really encompass all the three A's in discussing how we can still be able to apply those three things, even in a context of our students maybe not being online all the time, or even when we go back to face-to-face classes, which sometimes we forget we're actually going to do eventually. I think we've gotten so used to the online learning context so much because of the 2 years that we've been in it. But yes, I agree that hopefully when we go back as well, we also keep these things in mind. So I think uh, those are the questions that we have right now. But we do have a lot of insights in our chat box, and I do want to share them with you, Sir Galvin.
Sure,
So
go
we
ahead.
have here um, from kay Jesseline Lamugdang, she says, ngayong online class, naging obligado lahat magpa-load, text and data usage. So we definitely feel the struggle. Even for us at home, even if you have internet connection, it's
Yeah,
always a good idea to have data as backup, just in case. So
yeah.
yes, definitely, it's one of the struggles we're facing right now. Christine Bordeo says, I use Messenger po since
Mhm.
yon ang mas madaling way for my students to access or further lessons. So they use Messenger. I think Facebook Messenger has a free option now
Yes,
with most of
yes,
our um, telecom companies. So it's very good because at least even without the load, even without data, our students can still reach us, which is great. But of course, that's limited to students who do have the device for it. So we need
right.
to consider as well that we have students that maybe don't have that access as well. But great idea. Thank you, Christine, for sharing that. I think our other teachers may want to look into that as well as a means of communication between them and their students. Diane Calma says, oh, still watching from Tarlac. So thank you. Good afternoon, Diane. So glad you're joining us today. Christine also says, that's the most challenging po talaga, the internet connection. Because most of our students nahihirapan po to have stable connection,
Right.
which we definitely understand. Jesseline Lomugdang says, I agree with you, sir. The mental health of the teachers are also affected. So I guess this is in relation to the setting of boundaries when it comes to
Mhm.
being available to our students. The mental health of the teachers are also affected. Lots of paperwork and entertaining students' concerns. And then from Jesseline Lomagdang as well, the involvement of the family and more knowledgeable people can also play an important role in remote learning. Would you like to maybe share some thoughts on that one? Because I think that's a
Yeah,
good point.
I think that's a great point. That didn't actually I wasn't able to mention it, but that did
Mhm.
come up when we interviewed some of our DepEd students, the grade
Mhm.
school students. In fact, I remember one of them saying, "Madalas hindi alam ni Mama, so tinatanong ko na lang si Dada." Parang gano'n. Parang
Yeah.
so. Um, pero I think as teachers we can also ano no so parang I know that we have both good and bad experiences related to that. Maybe the good
Mhm.
experience would be, oh, the parents are really guiding the students. Maybe the bad experience might be, and I've heard this a lot also, the negative experience rather might be that the parents are doing the learning for the students. I remember a while ago saying that said that maraming natututunan yung parents. No? Pero yung parents nga ba yung natututo or yung students? No? So, yun siguro yung kailangan, yun siguro yung, parang we just have to
Mm.
be careful with that. Parang, that's something we may need to think about no na yun. Usually I think I'd like to think it's still rooted in um, the students not being able to do it. um, kumbaga maybe in those modules wherein students ask for the help of parents. The modules have not been able to have been designed with the right
Mhm.
amount of challenge. We know that from teacher education, di ba? Dapat parang when we're designing something, we should design it towards the right amount of challenge. And there's a sweet spot, the right amount
Mhm.
of challenge, no? Kasi alam natin from psychological theory that if it's too much challenge, students will disengage. Ayaw ko nang gawin yan, mahirap yan. Mama, ikaw na lang gumawa nito. Diba?
Mhm.
If it's too easy, parang masyado nang madali ito, hindi ako na-engage. No? So, and I know it's tricky. Parang, what's that? Diba? Parang, the answer differs from one situation to another. But I think looking for that spot is quite important, most especially in modular learning, where the teachers will not be there. Because I think those are some things that we were able to wing in
Mhm.
face-to-face learning, because we
Yeah.
can give a challenge and then we see, oh my, the students find it hard, so we scaffold, we come into
Mhm.
scaffold. But in printed format, you won't be around to do that scaffolding.
Mhm.
So a lot of things, to be honest, and I really respect a lot of you guys who have been doing printed models and designing them, because it's not easy. The work is not easy, because you have to design a well-designed printed module, self-paced module. You really need to foresee a lot of these things. No? You really need to think about a lot of these things. So,
Uh,
congratulations po sa mga gumagawa ng printed modules. Bilim na bilim po ako sa inyo. Mahirap po yung trabaho yan.
Definitely. It's much harder than talaga actually than, face to face, like you said, because face to face we can gauge how our students are doing, we can help them out. And even through online learning, when we have sessions, at least we can see our students and help them in any way they can. Pero yung modular where the students are really usually on their own, it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of consideration on how you're going to structure it in a way that
Yeah.
the students can be able to do it. And I think that also plays into the autonomy thing,
Mm.
where
Right.
our the way we structure these things, the way we make them, should be in a way that the students can handle them on their own. So less chances that they
Right.
get help from mom and dad,
Yes,
right?
yes. Exactly,
Less
exactly.
less chances of mom and dad doing the work for them because they can do it on their own. They know how to do it. But
Right.
again, also considering giving them a little bit of that challenge to so that we can push them further and not just keep them in their comfort zone as well. So we do have a couple more
Sure. Go
insights
ahead.
here. From Alcan Alfonte, he says, it's still vital for the teacher to be available even though they are not at school. All communication that are available should be resorted to by the teacher. And to continue, he also says, people at home should be equipped as well to help the child in learning, but not really becoming handy in doing their learner's task, which we mentioned. They should be there to guide, not be the one doing it. So very
Right.
good points there. From Christine Bordeos, so thank you. It helps a lot po talaga and listening from the experts. So we've definitely learned a lot from you today, Sir Galvin. And Ray Makalipay says, they are a person, they are a teacher who actually writes modules. So
Ayan,
good
Sir
job.
Ray. Congratulations, sir. And good luck.
Yes, definitely. And to all our other teachers as well who are in the same boat, who write modules and create these things. Um, Saludo talaga kami sa inyo because that's definitely something that's not easy to do. So I think that covers our questions and our insights for today. Once again, thank you so much, Sir Galvin,
Thank
for
you.
sharing your expertise
Thank
and
you,
for
Celine.
being here to answer our questions and as well as share some of those thoughts, those insights with us. I think I speak for everybody here, for our viewers as well, when I say that we've definitely learned a lot. And you've definitely reminded us to keep these things in mind. And you've raised some good questions that we need to think to ourselves about how we design our lessons, how we design the way our students learn. Because these are things that maybe we've forgotten to consider, or maybe we haven't really put much thought into considering. And it's really, very helpful to be reminded of that so that we can also be there to really support our students as best as we can, not just in terms of helping them become autonomous or, making things more applicable to them, but also being available to them as well, especially now when we have this online learning situation because of the pandemic. So once again, thank you, Sir Calvin. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
Thanks,
for
Celine.
spending
And
your
thanks to the
afternoon with
teachers
us.
who joined us today. Salamat.
All right. our open forum for today. If you do have other questions, our viewers today, and even our team replay viewers, if you have questions that maybe were not addressed here today and you would still like to ask us, feel free to forward them to us through our TagPros Education Facebook page. And we will be doing our best to, of course, give you the answers that you seek from our guest speaker. So we'll try our best to get in touch with Sir Galvin to answer any questions that you may still have that we weren't able to cover here today. Once again, thank you to Sir Galvin. Of course, thank you everybody for tuning in to our session today. It was definitely an informative session and such a great way to learn on this wonderful Saturday afternoon. So let's give him another round of applause. Let's give him some virtual applauses in the chat box in the comment section. All right, now before we finally end our session for today, I would once again like to invite everybody to, of course, check out our TagPros Teacher Partners program. And again, I'd like to remind everyone of the different benefits that you can get if you join us as one of our teacher partners. So as teacher partners, you may look forward to the following benefits. You can earn while teaching your expertise at your own pace, place, and time. So a very flexible way for you to teach and earn at the same time. You have access to teacher CPD accredited training and professional development. You will have the opportunity to participate in international professional learning opportunities in the United States with our official education partners. So this is not only an opportunity for you to share your passion with people in our country, but also internationally and in the United States. You will also receive your official certified TagPros Teacher Partner Badge and many more other perks as you create and conduct your own online classes. So definitely something to get excited about and something that you might want to look into. So to know more about the program, please do spend some time and check out our education marketplace platform at tagpros.us. All right, so that ends our session for today, but do remember to share your evaluation with us. Share with us your thoughts about today's webinar workshop in our evaluation form through our website. So that will be at tagpros.org/webinar. And under the video of our webinar for today, you will find there the evaluation form or the link for the evaluation form for today's session. So please do remember that the evaluation form will be open until Friday at 11:59 p.m. So you have about a week to fill up the evaluation form. And a quick reminder again that answering and submitting the evaluation form is necessary in order for you to be able to claim your e-certificate. All right, so make sure that you get your evaluation in before we close it next Friday. We also have the link posted here on the screen. Okay, and just a reminder as well that we will be issuing the e-certificates 2 weeks after we close it. We close the evaluation form. So please do be patient, and we thank you so much for your understanding. All right, so that will end our webinar workshop for today, but we definitely hope to see you again next Saturday for our next webinar workshop series. Make sure as well to go to our website at tagpros.us/webinar to be able to join our upcoming webinars. Thank you so much. And as always, keep updated with TagPros Education by following our official social media pages. We are available on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and again, our own website at tagpros.org. Okay? And please invite as well, of course, your family and friends who you think might be interested in some of our topics, or if you have educators that you may know would benefit a lot from our webinar workshops, then definitely invite them to join us for our Saturday webinars and for all our other events. Again, I'm Selena Staris, and thank you again so much for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great and wonderful week